visualize the mass. People could individualize the mass culture. So it's strategy are institutions or structures of power, right? So they are the producers of this structure. But tactics were adopted by each individual users. So each individually could act in a very tactical way that is meaningful and not determined by the plans of the state power. So therefore, by focusing how ordinary people in their everyday life adopt practical tactics to subvert the strategy laid out by the state will be my methodology. The question, I want to, address is first is why? Why did some Chinese prefer to work with the Japanese, right, in producing the film? The second question is probably how did those Chinese work with those Japanese? To answer the first question, it has a lot to do with colonial modernity, right? Colonial modernity provided opportunities for Chinese youth. In the second half of Manchu Guoli adopted a new educational system. Chinese students after middle school are urged to go to a vocational school. Only Japanese students, they could go to high school, to more advanced school. Also, the employment opportunity declined. Therefore, working with Japanese actually provide new opportunities for those youth who couldn't go to a higher education or they have less opportunity, pursue other careers. And also, we have to realize it's the context of military occupation colonialism. The average Chinese people, they have to meet their sociological needs, right? They want to receive a better education, find a good career, get married, raise a family, right? So the most basic human needs has to be met. Of course, to work for this film company, they could develop, skills or technological proficiency in cinema arts. They receive better pay, greater freedom, right? So, and then the next question is how did they work with this Japanese, film company? Well, this company was actually created by Guangdong Army and the Manchukuo government. So it's really the propaganda machine which produced used film to launch an ideological war against the Chinese nationalists and Chinese communists. So the competing allegiance of this film company is, of course, produce this national policy film for Manchukuo to serve the propaganda need of Japan, right? And then it did have another dimension, that is, they want to produce good entertainment movies for Chinese audience, Chinese viewers in Manchukuo to oust the Shanghai film from Manchukuo. So then for Chinese film workers, right, to making film together with the Japanese, they got to make artistic choice, right? So most of the Japanese film workers, they serve as the early directors, they serve as script writers, they almost monopolize all the technological positions. And then, of course, they would rather prefer a modernist representation of Manchukuo as a, modern, this modern, country with ethnic harmony and the kingly way. So, but when the Chinese film workers, they start to, make film independently, they would rather venerate the traditional Chinese culture and the value instead of giving Manchukuo a modernist representation, right? So it's like you are working with, kind of like an enemy, but you still could use your art, right? Make this artistic choice. Basically, they don't necessarily identify, with the Japanese ideology. Then what were the daily tactics the Chinese, film worker adopted? They could negotiate with the company. So, and also their attitudes towards the company oscillate between conformity and subversion. They could adopt passivity, non-cooperation. They could even resign, even leave Manchukuo. Sometimes they will confront the Japanese. So sometimes their attitudes were ambivalent. They were quite ambiguous in their attitudes towards Japanese. sometimes, you know, in their daily life, they mock the Japanese in light-hearted ways. So that's the word. So I would like to introduce a few group of Chinese film workers. So first of all, that's the actors. All the film actors in this company except one, that's Li Xianglan or Yamaguchi Yoshiko. Here's Li Xianglan, this one with the Japanese national flag. But the rest of the female actor and the male actors, they were all recruited from major cities, Harbin, Shenyang, and then Dalian and Changchun. So they were trained by Japanese. You see a Japanese woman who raised her arm. She was teaching the Chinese actors how to dance in the traditional Japanese kabuki theater way, right? The lady who stand in front of the bookcase is actually Li Xianglan, Li Koran or Li Xianglan. So here's a picture, Li Xianglan with a Chinese actress, Meng Hong. They were visiting Japan in the spring of 1939. So Chinese actors, they were trained by Japanese experts. And then they work with Japanese directors. So from 1938 to 39, all the directors were Japanese. So you see, actually in the working setting, they could have pretty good relationship with the Japanese directors. You see, this one is Takahara. Takahara Fujiro, he was teaching this Man-A comedian, Liu Enjia, how to ride horses. This young Japanese director was holding Zheng Xiaojun, and this one is Wang Fuchun, the two leading actors in his film. And then again, Takahara Fujiro, he was trying to gather his film crew and interpret the stories to them. And then this one is Mizuge Liuiqi and the young Chinese actress, because they two work together quite a lot, and she's specialized in playing those romantic heroine. So of course, the company actually tried to produce national policy film, but this national policy refers to Manchukuo's national policy, which is not exactly the same as Japan's national policy. So you see Man-A film workers, they work with leading Japanese actors like Hara Setsuko. And then this one is Li Xianglan. He was playing the Taiwanese Aborigines in a 1943 movie. Of course, the company trained the Chinese actors. They would deploy them to more like featureless propaganda films. But this company also have to, make profits, right? Make their movie popular so that the Chinese are willing, right, to buy the tickets. So therefore, the company actually, also have to make entertainment movies. So you see mixed genres. Sometimes, it's the early movies are pure propaganda. But later, from 1939 on, you see they start to make entertainment movies. And of course, for those actors, right, working for this company means a lot. First of all, it's this, they all became celebrities, right? Through this media publicity, the company used them to advocate, Japanese festival, and then they enjoyed a much better material life. But in their private life, they never, genuinely share the company's ideology. They just more come here either for economic reasons or to realize their dream to be in the cinema art. The Japanese directors is the next group. The directors, they are all proficient in Japanese language. Initially, quite a few of them are from Dalian because that's the Canton Shu, right? So it's like Zhu Wenshun, Wang Ze, Zhou Xiaobo, and then actually this one, Zhang Tianci was from Taiwan, and Song Shaozong and these two studied in Japan. So pretty much Japanese proficiency is a must for the Chinese directors. In the beginning, because Japanese actors, Japanese directors only use Japanese in their direction. So most of the Chinese actors, they don't quite, possess the language skills. So the Chinese director was first hired as interpreter. You see, here are the Japanese cameraman. Here's probably the director. And then Zhu Wenshun was in the middle. He was actually translating for the Japanese director technicians to, this is a Bai Mei and this one is Ji Yanfen. So this closeness of working with Japanese director actually gradually enabled this, interpreter assistant to acquire the experience of directing movie on the floor. So later, when Chinese directors were allowed to make their own films, so they used their Japanese-influenced cinema language to direct popular movies for Chinese. But Chinese directors all avoided national policy film. So they make popular entertainment movies by following the film genres in Shanghai before the 1937 occupation of Shanghai. So they will make detective movies, martial arts, moral drama, or movies reflecting urban lives. That's the kind of movie they would like to make. Historical drama, they used traditional Chinese classical literature like Shui Hu, Water Margins, or like Qi Xia Wu Yi, those kind of stories. Sometimes they will adapt Manchurian folklore, like the three fairies, descendant to the Changbai Mountain. That's the Manchurian folklore. So pretty much they use the Japanese, more like camera work to tell Chinese story. Of course, the other group of film workers, they are Chinese technicians. Most of the Chinese technicians are graduated from the Film Academy of Manchurian Film Association. So it's like Wang Qiming. Earlier, he was an actor, but under Amasaku's reform, they finally allow the Chinese to be a film technician. He actually requests the company to change from acting to be a cinematographer. Ma Shouqing was sent by Manchurian Film Association to study in Tokyo cinema school. So later he became a leading technologist. So for those technicians working at MAN, enabled them to master the film technology. Later, this technological expertise enabled them to survive the chaos after the collapse of Manchukuo. Many of them, in protecting the machinery of MAN, they actually joined the communist forces, helped the communists to transport Manchurian Film Association's machine to northern Manchuria. Many of them later, became socialist film workers. And then, of course, there are also film writers, journalists at the Manchurian cinema, that journal owned by this company. The film writers, many of them were originally literary writer, because of the ideological censorship and also this political surveillance, they actually came to MAN for new opportunity. So they write for those journals, and then they also, write about film theory. So coming to MAN transformed them from a literary type of talent to a film expert. Of course, Manchukuo was short-lived. By 1945, when Japan was defeated, communists and nationalists compete to control MAN. So most of the technicians followed the communists. They eventually moved the company's advanced film machinery to northern Manchuria. But some of the directors, they actually work for and also some elite actors, they work for nationalists in Zhongdian Sanchang, which later became Beijing Film Company. So in socialist era, for those who had the experience of working for Japanese, it's very embarrassing. But the experience to work with Japanese made them, sometimes create a very interesting, way for them to survive the socialist cinema. Like Fang Hua was originally from Dalian, so he was more like a cinematographer, technology major, graduate from the film academy. In socialist era, he became an actor, but he actually learned from his own experience. So in the Manchukuo era, Japanese and the Chinese, they will communicate with each other by using a pidgin language. 协和语, it's like they use Chinese words, but the Chinese words are put together in Japanese grammar. Nidi, tabagodi, mishi, so do you smoke? That kind of language. So when he played the Japanese military officer in Pingyuan Youjidui guerrilla bands of the Great Plain, he made this Japanese officer kind of, very suspicious, evil, but he deployed 协和语 for those, people who had the experience of Manchukuo. All of a sudden, they realized, oh, that's the way the Japanese speak when they spoke to us, So my findings are this, right? So even Manchukuo was kind of like, it's a state struggle to claim as a nation. So in the background, when China and Japan was at war, cinema in Manchuria offered this transnational cooperation. So between Chinese and Japanese film workers. So in the field of cinema, you will see Japanese film worker and the Chinese film worker, they have all kinds of relationship, teacher, disciple, they might be co-author of a script, they might travel together, they might have personal friendship, right? So it's not necessarily, hostile. Sometimes it's a good working relationship. And also the Chinese, you have to cooperate, at least show a public compliance with Japanese, right? With Manchukuo policy. But pretty much their cooperation consists of coping strategy to meet their basic needs and sometimes to fulfill their personal and professional interests. It's a cooperation, for survival rather than they genuinely share the ideology of Japanese, imperialism. Also, the Chinese film worker adopted very practical, very personal, very flexible tactics in their everyday life through negotiation, through, sometimes through taking the advantage of the company, through resign and move to the other parts of the China, or sometimes they change their profession from actor to a technician, from a writer to a director. So they try to circumvent the Japanese imposition. Meanwhile, they try to mitigate their unfair treatment because there is an ethnicity-based more like prejudice against the Chinese. So the other thing I found very interesting is there is a very strong connection between the Manchurian cinema and the socialist film industry. First of all, the personnel. The Chinese communist, film industry actually began with all the machines left by Japanese with Manyin. So the Chinese, also they got a lot of personnel of the Manchurian Film Association, including more than 100 Japanese workers. When Japan defeated, there are 150 some Japanese. They stayed in China till 1953. So that means for 8 years, those Japanese film workers and those Chinese technicians, they together work for the Chinese communists. During the Civil War, also in the early socialist era, they were helping the socialist cinema, especially in the field of art movie or animation, anime. And also in terms of film genres, you see the continuity. Japanese, they want to make ethnic harmony films to preach about the ethnic harmony of Manchukuo. But socialist China is the same. In the 1950s, Changying, that's the Changchun Film Studio, which is kind of like, a socialist period. They bring back the equipment of Man, establish a new film studio. The socialist film ethnic harmony focus on Chinese minority, Mongolian, Koreans, the ethnic minority in Yunnan. So actually, some of the male film director like Zhu Wenshun, for him, making ethnic harmonies movies, it's more like he's an old hand in doing that for Japanese, not for the socialist cinema. And then, of course, the technique, right? The film language of Chinese cinematographer. So Japanese imparted their film language or their camera work to Chinese directors at, at this Manchurian Film Association. But the Chinese film worker at the Manchurian Film Association imparted the same technology to communist film workers. So, and then of course, another similarity is, both Japanese and the socialist state use film for propaganda. Actually, when some of us were young, right, especially in rural China, I grew up in the urban area, but in the rural area, sometimes you will see the mobile projection team. So they send the film team to a rural area where there's no electricity. They will use generator. But actually, sending the mobile projection team to the countryside was a practice adopted by Manchurian Film Association. They want to use their film to influence citizens of Manchukuo in the war front. So that's pretty much my finding. I would stop here. I know Dr. Faison will have questions to ask.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ma. And I'd like to thank the University of Minnesota Department of History for helping us make this reunion possible. It's so wonderful to see you after these years and to get to read this really, really compelling book that you've written. I wanted to start off by asking you to talk a little bit about how you came to this topic. You had written an earlier book on female journalists and feminism in China, which would, on the face of it, appear to be quite a different topic than something about film workers, particularly in Manchuria. So could you, I think Dr. Chambers had said something about how there was work involved in the first book that clued you into some of the research questions that you would ask here. Tell us about that process.
Well, it seems to be two very different topics, but I guess the similarity is I studied the popular media, right? It's one is a women's journal, the other one is this print media in Manchukuo. So actually, the way I found those Manchurian film workers, my first project I studied women journalists. So in my I was largely doing research in Beijing. Then I found the some of the women's journal published in Beijing in the 1940s. They were really those journal controlled by Japanese. You see, Beijing was also after 1937, it's an occupied zone. So actually, it was in North China I found the image of Manchurian film actors. They were speaking message. They travel to Japan. They will say, "I admire Japanese modernity. Japanese are so kind." What puzzled me is how could some Chinese, right? They kind of at least seemingly they just give Japanese all approval, right? Japanese are kind. They are more modern than us. So of course, that discovery didn't start this project. It just attracted me, to explore a future possibility. But I do feel my training at the history department in University of Minnesota prepared me for this, new pursuit. First of all, I work for Professor Chris Isaac, as a research assistant. I was stunned by his, primary sources. It's village data gathered by South Manchurian Railway Company. It's each village, how many households, what kind of animal, what kind of labor in each household. That's kind of, you feel, it's striking now. It's the exhaustive data. So how modern science, right, survey, statistics served the Japanese, occupation of Manchuria. And then in the year 1999, Professor Faison came, and then she taught me about pre-war Japanese modernity. Most of Americans are more interested in SCAP and the post-war modernity. But Dr. Faison just introduced me to pre-war Japanese modernity, the Taisho democracy, the labor. She's a labor historian. And also we watch, the Japanese film like I Graduate, But, and then you also show me the Kanji movie about the wartime Japanese soldiers. So that's something, I should have known, but I just didn't, because, it seems that both Chinese cinema and the Japanese cinema were influenced by Hollywood movie, but the two nations was at war. So it seems each nation, they developed their own cinema, right, through their own interaction with Hollywood. So, but the Manchurian cinema really, is a very interesting interaction, right? So the Japanese film expertise and the Chinese film aesthetics based on Shanghai films, they kind of met each other in Manchuria. And then also there's another historian after Dr. Faison is David Tucker. So his dissertation, he was from Iowa State. So he studied architecture modernity and urban planning in Manchukuo. I was also shocked by his research. Pretty much, the Manchukuo period, you'll see the entire, northeastern part of China. Almost all the major cities are designed by Japanese. So it's like the capital, Xinkyo or Changchun, is even more modern than Tokyo, because it's, you have more land to plan out, right? Less resistance. So, but there's one thing, that is, if you only look at urban planning or architectural expression for modernity, you neglect the real experience, how Chinese people actually lived. So if it's a very impressive building, someone told you that's where the Kampitai, the Thought Police live, or Guangdong Army headquarters, then that's not a pleasant experience, right? So therefore, I start to think, it is true, there's a very, impressive material dimension of colonial modernity. But just focusing on that, you might think Japanese are admirable, right? They are so, building such modern infrastructure, but that neglect the lived experience of Chinese people. Truly, it's a very oppressive regime, right? So, and then all this lumped together, that's when I start this research, I just want to study how Chinese people actually lived. And then all the archives about Manchukuo were destroyed. And then both nationalist Taiwan, the socialist China, just ignored Manchukuo because it's embarrassing, right? It's a third of the part of China was controlled by Japanese. So then I have to turn to the media sources, the Manchukuo print media, find my topic. Of course, this, again, my interest in the film, film figures, and it all lumped together became this project.
Thank you for that response, which now causes me to have to really rethink the order of the questions I was going to ask you, because that lets me go in so many different directions. And I think one of the things I maybe want to jump to that was embedded in your response just now has to do with the relationship between or among Hollywood and then Shanghai film production and then MANE, Manchurian Film Association. But before you respond to this, and I'll try to embed the question in a little bit of a framework for the audience who, of course, have not, many of whom may not have yet read your book, and they may or may not know a lot about this period of Chinese and Japanese imperial history. But Shanghai film production was, as I understand it from your book, a really central area in the early days of Chinese cinema, where, so if you have the beginnings of cinema in China and in Japan were, as you just mentioned, following on the heels of what was going on in Hollywood, which was really seen as the film leader globally in the early 20th century. And so Shanghai film becomes the center of the production of, or the beginnings of a kind of national film for China.
Mhm.
But the problem is that Japanese invasion gets in the way of all of this. So Japanese military begins invading China. Well, one could claim there's certainly military actions before 1931, but by 1931, most certainly in Manchuria, which is the focus of your study, there's a full-on invasion of the Northeast, the area called Manchuria at that time, which is then taken over by the Japanese military, which installs a puppet state. It never takes it over as a formal colony, but it installs a puppet state. And so the entirety of your study is based on this period where the Japanese are in control of that section of China through a puppet state and trying to draw on Shanghai film, which is kind of advanced, create a brand new film history of film legacy in Manchuria with very specific political agenda. And they're needing to do it for a Chinese audience, but they are a Japanese occupying force, as I said, and as you have said, with their own concerns. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that relationship between Shanghai film production and what does or does not get carried over to Manchuria.
Manchuria didn't have a film industry before the Japanese create this company, but they have many movie theaters. So even in the first half of Manchukuo, so most of the theaters in Manchuria still show Shanghai movie. They also show, Harbin probably showed more European movies. And then Shenyang is a center for Chinese movie. Dalian is a center for Japanese movie. So, but truly, the theaters in Manchuria, they all showed the Shanghai movie. So that is before there's a film industry in Manchuria, the so-called film culture in Manchuria is truly the Shanghai film culture for ordinary Chinese. But the Japanese, especially after the full-scale war with China. So the first thing Japan did was they banned the movie importation from Shanghai. And then they export the Japanese movie into Manchuria. But of course, many Chinese, didn't, speak Japanese. So then they decide to, create a film studio. This film studio will use Chinese actor and then use Chinese dialogue, produce movie carry probably more propaganda value plus some entertainment value, but largely for Chinese audience. Therefore, the creation of Man is like, they try to bend the pre-existing Chinese film culture and add a Japanese sensibility, Japanese directorial style, Japanese taste, of course, a lot of propaganda. But I feel this in May, from 1938 to 39, only Japanese directors were making movie. From 1940s to 1945, some of the Chinese assistants, they gradually start to, direct their own films. Of course, they try to return to the Chinese sensibility, but the camera work they learned is a Japanese one. So therefore, the Chinese director, even they were making independent films, they are using the Japanese, camera work. That's what they learned from the Japanese director. They try to narrate a Chinese story. So you can argue the cinema in Manchuria, the film produced by the Manchurian Film Association is more like a hybrid. It's more like a hybrid cinema. Their camera work is Japanese style, but the story is Chinese, So Chinese director played a very important role to localize the Chinese, cinema. So it's like Japanese art plus Chinese story.
Yuxin, you and I had spoken earlier about me possibly asking you a question about Amakusa Masahiko, who was a Japanese director, a very formative one for Mange, for the Manchurian Film Association. I actually want to maybe jump to something else because I don't want to take too much of our time focusing on all the Japanese inflections of this, which are there, obviously, because it's a Japanese occupied territory and it's a Japanese controlled film production association. But your interest in what you've shown us in this book is really about the Chinese side of things, about the Chinese everyday life experience of the workers, and by which you mean in this book the actors, the directors, the screenwriters and journalists, and then finally the technicians, and technicians includes everybody from cinematographers to makeup artists. And so I think I'm going to skip, and maybe we'll go back to Amakusa if we have time later, but I want to ask you about how, one of your big arguments is the way that Chinese workers negotiated the demand by the Manchurian Film Association and its directors to create national policy films, by which they meant Manchuria, Japanese directed national policies for Manchuria, Japanese controlled Manchuria, to create kind of propaganda films on the one hand, but also they wanted to create entertainment films for the Chinese population. And if they could combine the two of them, all the better in their minds. But in each of your categories of workers, Chinese workers with Manet, the individuals who were involved were needing to negotiate very carefully their own priorities, their own ideas about nationalism, whether they agreed with the Japanese propaganda or not. And in your story, the vast majority of them did not. And in particular, the last group that you focus on, the technicians, that's where you talk the most about what these workers end up doing. You talk about it in other categories as well, but really with the technicians, you focus a lot on what they're doing after the end of the war, after Manet is dissolved, because they're the ones who are left. Everybody else has kind of fled. And they're the ones who are left, and they are in control of the production equipment, which becomes, as you pointed out in your presentation, so important for the succeeding socialist government. And many of them become really central figures in socialist filmmaking for the People's Republic of China. And since one of your main arguments is that, of course, none of these workers can be seen as merely being collaborationists with the Japanese, nor can they be seen only as being, purely resistant to what the Japanese were doing. How is it that, what's the process by which people like the ones who became prominent in Chinese film after their experiences with the Manchurian Film Association avoided being labeled as collaborationists?
That's a very good question. First of all, this 4 group of people didn't equally survive in the socialist cinema. The group who suffered the most is actually the writer, the film writer or the journalist, because their writing, it's like, that's most ideologically charged, right? So the actors, most of the actors didn't survive because probably there's a kind of a self-censorship, right? Because some of the actors, they were charged as collaborators. So, and then their image, is everywhere in the Manchukuo print media. Only those actors who helped the communist film industry, they left Changchun, they moved to Xingshan, which is just 60 kilometers from Soviet border. So most of the actors, simply disappeared. They just, hide from the public. But those who actually helped the communist film, they survived. And then the group who survived the best is actually a technician, because they spend their years, in protecting a machine, in transporting a machine, deploy the machine for communist propaganda. They establish a revolutionary record, and some of them were admitted into the Communist Party. So the technician actually survived the best. So, and then the directors, the film directors, they also suffered. Some film directors, they pretty much disappeared. Some of them died during the Cultural Revolution. But there are also film workers, for example, there are some film directors, they only make historical films, like the Taiwanese, film director Zhang Tianci. He survived in communist era. He continued to make this drama movie, just a recording of opera. He survived. So Zhu Wenshun, because even during the Man-A period, Zhu Wenshun make movie by focusing on the urban poor people. So he was fine. But Zhou Xiaobo, another director who made a propaganda movies about, how the Japanese helped the Yellow River flooding in 1940. And then that movie portrayed the Japanese army were helping the Chinese refugee in Henan area. So Zhou Xiaobo actually didn't survive. So I feel this pretty much whether a group of people can survive depends on what the communists need the most. They need the man equipment. They need the technicians the most. Actually, the actors, the communists brought a lot of actors from Yan'an. So they don't need the actors that much, but probably to accommodate those, helped them. So some actors survive. But for the writers, they largely, were purged. So I just don't know whether this is a sufficient answer.
No, it is. That was wonderful. Thank you. I think I might throw it over to Dr. Chambers at this point to see if there are any questions from the audience, and if not, I've got like a dozen more for you.
Yes, I know. This is a fascinating conversation, and we have plenty of material to go on. But if anyone in the audience does have a pressing question, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try to get to those as well. Oh, here's one from Patrick Chan. The Manchurian Film Association produced a lot of movies and documentaries. Did any of those films survive the war and become legacies for future Chinese to enjoy or to criticize?
Yes, the company produced 117 live features. They are stories, story movies. But so far, only 4 survived, because when the Soviet Red Army entered Changchun, they actually destroyed a lot of features. But most of the documentary movie Man produced later were, taken to Russia by the Soviet Red Army at the State Film Archives in Russia. So it was in probably the 1980s or 90s. It's a Japanese film scholar studied at the Russian National Film Archives. He actually discovered the documentaries made by Manchurian Film Association. For some very strange reason, there are 5 live features mixed with the documentaries. So that's probably what survived so far. Only 4 live feature. There are a lot of documentary films survived.
And I know there's another question, but before Dr. Chambers goes to that, I just want to point out that Dr. Ma's book contains 2 appendices that are so robust and so substantial and will stand as such a huge contribution to current and future scholars of this area. I just want to tell you all what's in them because they speak to this question. The first appendix is basically a set of small, brief biographies of all the major figures, the actors, directors, the writers, the technicians, everybody who she talks about in this book. I mean, substantial. The second goes to the question that was just answered. In her second appendix, she provides filmography with synopsis for all of the live action feature films that she could find information about from Manchurian Film Association in chronological order of when they were produced. And I can't tell, I mean, anybody who works in film, anybody who works in anything, these kinds of lists, these kinds of compilations gold mines, and they are incredibly painstaking research to undertake. So I just want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Ma for doing that.
Yes, indeed. That's really important. So we have a question from Jishui Yang. I'm sure I've mispronounced your name. Apologies. Who says, thank you for the great talk. You mentioned the research about colonial modernity in Korea. How do you think about the difference of the pattern of colonial modernism between Manchukuo and the other colonies in Japan's empire? And I'll just say, as an outsider to this field, I was really interested as well in the sort of movements around the empire, that we had directors from Taiwan and Korea. And so there was this movement, as well as the sort of comparison of what were the rules in the different sites.
That's such a great question. I actually taught Japanese imperialism to help myself, to do this research. Actually, in the Japanese, colonial policy in Korea and in Taiwan is cultural assimilation. But the same assimilation policy produced totally different, result in Taiwan and in Korea. Taiwan was more like a China's Qing Empire's frontier. So it was truly the, colonial Taiwan brought modernity, and gave the Aborigines and the Han Chinese a shared identity as Taiwanese. So therefore, Japanese colonial rule in Taiwan produced a group of colonial elite. They actually identify themselves as Japanese. They believe they are Japanese, but they were also Taiwanese. By saying Taiwanese is they want to be treated as equal subjects as the Japanese. So it's like the colonial modernity in Taiwan create a pro-Japan elite. They are pro-Japan. They think they are Japanese, but they just want to be treated equal. So the Taiwanese identity was truly coined during the colonial era. They said we are neither Chinese, because China was, no longer part. They no longer belong to China. We are not Japanese because they don't have representation. There is a parliamentary movement in Taiwan from 1915 to 1920s. They want to have their own, parliamentary movement. So in Korea, it's totally the opposite, because Korea has such a strong stake, the Yi dynasty, which lasted for 500 years. So colonial modernity came at a time, the last decade of the Yi dynasty, Koreans, they were modernizing. They have nationalist modernizers. It's just their nationalist modernizing effort were cut short by the more like the colonial governor. So the Japanese assimilation policy in Korea actually create two factions. One is the independence faction. They just want, modernize and then overthrow the Japanese. And then the other faction is, colonial, just the modernity group. So it's just the same assimilation policy create one group of people who want to overthrow Japan, because, they were Korean nationalists. And then in Taiwan, it's like, the idea of Taiwanese identity, which means we were Japanese, but we want to be treated the same. Well, the policy in Manchukuo is not assimilation. It's a harmony of the 5 ethnic groups. So they actually prefer each ethnic group in Manchukuo keep their own ethnic identity. So therefore, also Manchukuo is very interesting. So that is before Japanese, established Manchukuo, is Manchuria a state, or it's part of the China? So actually, according to Duar's book, there was state in Manchuria, but it's not stable, not strong, because after the Qing dynasty collapsed, there are regional warlords, the Zhang father-son, the Zhang warlords. So therefore, there is a regional state, but it's not very strong. So also the regional warlords, they shared Manchuria with, the Guangdong Shu. So therefore, the Manchukuo case kind of, between Korea and Taiwan. First of all, clearly those people, they think they were Chinese because, this long history, as the Qing Empire, and also Manchuria experienced fast modernization under the Chinese warlord Zhang Zuolin. So also Manchukuo only lasted for 14 years. So it's like, if there's colonial modernity, this colonial elite, some of them are just proficient, about, Japanese language, and then Japan, collapsed. So therefore, I just feel the short existence of Manchukuo made the colonial elite. It's just they probably developed a new expertise. Japanese language enjoyed elite status, but they suffered more after the collapse of the Manchukuo.
Well, thank you very much. As often happens in the book club, we get close to the top of the hour and we could go on for another hour if only we had the time to do so. I do think that both Dr. Ma and Dr. Faison can stay on after we officially close out if you have a few questions that you didn't get to pose, or you just want a chance to say hello, perhaps through alumni or professional networks. I will just read out one question and maybe it'll be in our minds, and then we'll close out the official event and have a more informal chat. So Patrick Chan says, thank you, Professor Ma, for a fascinating talk, and to Professor Chambers and Professor Faison for organizing. One more question. You mentioned some Chinese actors became communist film workers. Did any of the actors go to Taiwan? And if they did, how were they treated in Taiwan? I don't know if you can answer that in very briefly, Dr. Ma, or we'll have to wait until after the close.
Yeah, there are two female actors went to Taiwan. One is Meng Hong. She just got married and live in Taipei, never appeared on the screen. The other actor is Zhang Xiaomin. So she actually later specialized in playing mother in Chong Yao's movie, the modern romance, the beauty, talent, that kind of a movie. Zhang Xiaomin actually specialized playing this harsh Chinese mother.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ma, for sharing this really terrific book with us, and to Dr. Faison for posing such interesting questions and helping contextualize the talk. And thank you to all of you who came in today. Our next meeting will be on April 17th. You should get an email about that. We'll be featuring PhD alumna Nikki Buren, who teaches at the University of North Dakota, and she'll be speaking with Kirsten Delegard, who's the project director of the Mapping Prejudice project here at University of Minnesota, on scholar activism and community engagement. As always, we also invite you, if you're so moved, that the wonderful projects like the book, 2 books that Dr. Ma has written, are really owing to the support we're able to give our graduate students, who then go on to become such productive scholar historians. And so we do invite you, if you're interested, to make a donation, a gift that supports our graduate student fellowship fund. So with that, I will thank everyone again, and we'll close out the official book club. But if you would like to stay on and informally say hello, we will have a few minutes to do that as well. Thank you.